And now, The Good, the Bad, and the Weird presents
Fire Force meets Promare. So this is Nicho, just wanting to do another little solo rant for our spotlights. Just mainly I wanted to do a rant on movies, shows, and mediums with similar stories or concepts. And while I do know that there are a handful of different stories, there are some that cross the lines a little bit more than others. In my recent watchings, that has fallen to Fire Force and Promare, which I'm going to use as the primary vehicle for this rant. I did do a written review on both the series Fire Force and Promare, which you can find on our Facebook and Instagram pages at TGTBTW_podcast. Now, this comparison won't really be which is better or if Promare ripped off Fire Force. That's kind of a discussion for another time. But before diving too deeply into anything, for those unfamiliar with either franchise, Fire Force follows a group of firefighters known as the Special Fire Force, who fight people possessed by fire known as Infernals, while investigating their origins. Promare is about a group of firefighters known as Burning Rescue, who suppresses the pyrokinetic people known as the Burnished, who happen to stumble upon the origins of the Promare in the process. And take that what you will, but it is rather apparent that Promare more than less has a very similar premise to Fire Force. The timelines are a little wonky depending on who started what, so just take that for what it is. But this is also why I wanted to use these two as a comparison, as there are so many similarities, but the approach and execution are drastically different. Of which the rough formatting for this comparison will be broken down into 6 rough categories: inspiration, plot, protagonist, rivals, antagonists, side characters, world, and themes. As well, I will only be covering Fire Force as presented in the anime seasons 1 and 2 and not the manga, which I know now has a conclusion. And with this, there will be spoilers, but it won't be an in-depth discussion of those spoilers, so don't be too worried about that. There will be some, though. I mean, it's hard not to talk about it without spoiling a little bit of something. And they're more points of interest and comparison points. As well, I am fully aware that Fire Force has more time to develop characters as it's a longer runtime, and especially if it's a TV show. So the format compared to Promare is this discussion will not be about who developed a character better, but moreover the archetypal comparison between the two. So since nothing exists in the void, I think the best place to start will be with inspiration and the influences of each property. Looking into Fire Force, the inspiration for this series, as stated in an interview with the mangaka Tsushi Okubo with comicbook.com, he was inspired by the phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion and the idea that a burning zombie would be scary. Of which he initially had thoughts of a military force, but then because they were fighting off fire, firefighters would be more suited for extinguishing the burning zombies. So we have kind of a basic proto-military kind of force, which we do see a little bit in Promare as well. As for Promare, LRM Online had an interview with director Hiroyuki Imashi, where he stated that he wanted to do something with fire, where the idea was figuratively started just as a spark for the many meetings with the production staff. As well, in an interview with the creative team with CRB, they said they took influence from the Fast and the Furious for its visual styles and using it as a medium for pure entertainment. To which I do think they succeeded in that regards. Now, another aspect to take into account is not only what the director's goals for Promare were, but also the writing, since Promare was not developed by a solo individual like Fire Force was. In the article Insights into Promare from Studio Trigger, from Studio Trigger's Wakabayashi and Koyama by the Anime Herald, writer Kazuki Nakashima stated that he found inspiration from a sci-fi novel about cross-dimensional communication, which he did not name the novel, so take that what you will. This in itself highlights just for me initially, the different approaches to a very similar basis for a world and a story. One approach is from a more supernatural horror viewpoint, while one has a more science fiction oriented approach, which definitely creates a different style and feeling to each of the different properties. And even with the similar concept of spontaneous human combustion, it's important to note that this isn't just out of nowhere that someone's like, okay, spontaneous human or zombies on fire or people catching fire is a cool idea or something brand new. I mean, this is a pseudoscientific concept that dates back to 1746 by Paul Rowley in his article, Physiological Transactions, which was about the supposed spontaneous human combustion death of an Italian noblewoman named Cornelia Zangari Bondi. But the idea of spontaneous human combustion really wasn't popularized until Charles Dickens' 1852 novel Bleak House. As well, neither of them are the first one to really cover anything in the mainstream. I mean, there's references to it in South Park. This is Spinal Tap. They've both used those as concepts. But I think in terms of nerd culture, Fire Force, while feeling fresh and original, has some core similarities to the plot of 1998's horror game Parasite Eve, in which a woman plans to destroy the human race through spontaneous human combustion. For those who have gone much further into Fire Force, there's links there. And also, in other regards, the idea of pyrokinesis, or the ability to control the ability to control fire, has existed since the 19th century, although it was done more so through magic tricks. With the term pyrokinesis also being popularized by Stephen King's 1980 novel Firestarter. Not to mention a somewhat logical conclusion where fighting fires, who better than firefighters, which have existed in varying forms since ancient Rome, but in a more formal setting, the 17th century, following the Great London Fire of 1666. And fun little tidbit, we have building codes because of fires in insurance companies. Yeah, and I guess for me, the point of explaining all of this is just that while there are many correlations between the two franchises, they both pull in. They feel like they did develop independently, and they could have just had that same correlation of, well, fire, spontaneous human combustion. Firefighters are going to be a force for that. I mean, hell, firefighter movies are some of the first movies. I think the first narrative movie was about a firefighter. I mean, or one of the first ones at least. And I think it was called The Life of an American Fireman. But I mean, it's easy enough to say that Promare did rip off Fire Force, but at the same time, there's the inspiration, and there's a lot of similarities to other properties outside of each other's worlds. With this in mind, from the inspiration, I do want to take a look at both of the different approaches to the plots and other aspects of each series. As mentioned before, at the core, Fire Force and Promare are about people who control fire and people who fight against them. That's the easiest summary that you can put them together. On the surface, one can easily compare the initial concepts as being almost the same, but executed quite differently. Much like in comparison to movies such as The Illusionist or The Prestige, while having similar plots, each approach their stories with a different angle. And also in a similar manner, as Chris and I brought up in our last episode, Lake Placid is kind of a scaled down Jaws, but with an alligator, or or similar to the movie Alligator, but it takes place in the countryside instead of a sewer system. And in another comparison, Alien and Arrival are both first contact movies with different approaches to learning to communicate. One chooses communication through language and the other through violence, because we do have to remember that any interaction is some type of communication. And while I know the last comparison is potentially a little bit of a stretch, it has similar aspects of the utilization of firefighters in Fire Force and Promare in regards to their respective plots and little approaches. In terms of Fire Force, the fire department are utilized as a driving rift between the different companies as well as their different divisions within the overall organization. As well, their connection to Hajime Industries and the Holy Soul Temple brings an almost alien-like aspect where Hajime Industries, along with the Holy Soul Temple, serve as kind of the de facto ruling class and have more influence over the overall world and the companies than we initially think. Now, when it comes to Promare, the firefighters, while serving much like Company 8 and Fire Force as a special ops of sorts, their purpose is more in the background of the overall surrounding plot that develops around Gallo. The protagonist. I haven't said his name yet, but Gallo, the protagonist of Promare. As well, Burning Rescue serves a bit of a different purpose than Company 8. They serve rather as more of a detainment unit without having any real power overall. Their main thing is to control fires. Fire Force, it's a little bit more ambiguous, or not really ambiguous, it's more complex on what the different companies' goals are and what their purposes are. Specifically, Company 8 is a internal investigation audit force while also serving the company public, putting out fires, yada yada yada. They're a bit more complex than what we see in Promare. And also, in regards to Fire Force, the use of the firefighters is an essential and core aspect of the story and the world it builds around it. And Promare, they're just kind of in the background. They don't really do a whole lot. And also just the way they fight the fires is way different. I mean, Freeze Force from Promare uses mechs and technology to just suppress the fire for the most part. Fire Force does that, but the more focus from Fire Force is fighting fire with fire for the most part. It takes that concept and turns it into action-packed battles. I'm not saying that Promare isn't action-packed, but it plays out quite differently. And this, to me, at least proves that even if Promare did rip off Fire Force, its utilization of firefighters serves a different purpose. And it also serves as an occupation for our protagonist Gallo to initially oppose the eventually the antagonist turned protagonist Leo. Whereas Fire Force, that's their job, but it's also an integral part of the story, not necessarily the same with Promare. And with that in mind, let's take a look at the two protagonists. As well as Leo is kind of a protagonist, he's more of a secondary one and serves more as a rival antagonist, which I'll get into a little bit, but he's not really the focus of the movie, which honestly is kind of bad in my opinion, but that's for the review. For starters, both Shinra from Fire Force and Gallo have similar turning points that serve as their origins. Shinra's house burned down in a fire caused by a demon. Gallo's house was set ablaze by a burnished. Interchangeable, kind of exact same origin stories. But the similarities continue as these events lead them to become firefighters and leads them to wanting to protect people in their own way, but with different motivations. As Gallo seeks validation from his hero Cray, while Shinra wants to be recognized as a hero and appreciated for everyone. And through this, Shinra is also used as a way to find answers as to what happened, whereas Gallo's motivation just kind of ends there. It doesn't really drive much of the movie. And in that regard too, Shinra has more similarities to Leo than he does Promare's actual antagonist. And also Gallo, in his own way, serves to put him in his occupation as opposed to Leo, as stated in the plot portion. But I mean, both seek validation in different manners, but with that in mind, the seeking validation is a relatively common trope. I mean, hell, Shinra's story in some ways is quite like Naruto's. I mean, we got a tragic death. There's a demon involved. Shinra's got the power of a demon. Naruto's got the nine-tailed fox in him. Shinra, even though we know he has a dad, he doesn't really have like the fatherly figure that we don't really see a family as much, and it doesn't play too much into the role. He still feels alone. And I mean, we do see characters seeking validations in other series such as Miyamoto Musashi and Vagabond, Guts during the golden age of Berserk. And to be clear, I'm not super familiar with either of those franchises because I'm early on in them, but I do recognize these early tropes that are similar to Fire Force and elements of Promare. I mean, hell, even Luffy's desire to become king of the pirates in a way is a way of seeking validation from the others around him. And on top of all this, while Shinra and Gallo are arrogant, they have different approaches to their arrogance. Gallo is quite arrogant just because that seems to be his personality, where Shinra's comes from his rare ability and strong drive for acceptance that Gallo honestly doesn't have. Gallo just pushes forward and kind of goes with the flow. He feels a little bit different. But even the arrogance is generally a defining factor for protagonists in shonen manga from my experience. It's used as a way to knock them down a few pegs so that way they can rise back up to be arrogant again in the next portion of their arc, just to be knocked back down, and the cycle repeats over and over. And that's how we get like the Dragon Ball Z issue where every single series they have to revamp every character and bring out an even bigger threat, because how are you going to top Super Saiyan 4 Goku? And also from my previous examples, Naruto, Miyamoto Musashi, Guts, Luffy, and to build on that, Ichigo from Bleach, Light from Death Note, Itadori from Jujutsu Kaisen, and every single iteration of JoJo from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Everyone has that level of arrogance. Just it's a common trope that we see constantly through the genre. And the point in that, despite having similar origins and attitude, is that the execution between Gallo and Shinra make them feel quite like different characters, and even starts to split the divide even though they have similar occupations. Their origin stories are similar. It's always the different approach to how you're going to tell basically the same story again. Now, in traditional shonen series, what's more important than the antagonist many times is the rival himself. Someone who grows with the protagonist, but also works at times as the antagonist. And this is why I place this a little bit ahead of the antagonist in this discussion. When it comes to Fire Force, the rivalry is a bit more muddled than the traditional Goku-Vegeta style of rivalry. And this is because this role is really split plot-wise between Arthur and Sho. For starters, while Arthur fills the role of the traditional rival, he acts more like an asshole comrade than anything else, while Sho, at least in the first season, is more a combative rival on par with Shinra. As for Promare, this obviously falls to Leo, as he fills both the role as frenemy as the story progresses. Of which, between the three, Leo feels like a more natural in the role and better developed as a whole, despite the limitation on time, honestly. And while I know there is further development in Fire Force's progress, and this is where it currently stands. We don't get a whole lot of Arthur, and we don't have a whole lot of Sho after season 1. As well, in comparison between the two properties, once again, they all have superpowers and the rival protagonists, but they're seen through different genres anyways. And I mean, you have the Goku and Vegeta, Naruto and Sasuke, Ichigo and Uryu, Guts and Griffith in the Golden Age. Again, haven't gotten too far into that franchise. And JoJo and Dio, Light and Hell. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. There's always someone there to challenge the protagonists in a friendly rivalry way. Well, maybe not Light and Hell friendly, but friendly. And honestly, I think this is the biggest separation between Fire Force and Promare, is this rival situation. Is that there's not really anything that drives Shinra the same way that Gallo is driven, rivalry-wise, to become a greater and better person. They're not really as in direct conflict as they are, well, Sho and Shinra are towards the end of Season 1, but that ends that arc in what's presented to us. Whereas Promare, their constant back and forth between Leo and Gallo is building one to the other as they grow as characters. And now, with that out of the way, let's look at the true antagonists of Fire Force and Promare. Both have a somewhat shifting role of antagonists. Fire Force begins with enemies and investigation from within, but ultimately leads to the White Clad, a group of mysterious organizations that's led by the Evangelists, seeking to collect the 8 pillars who possess the Eidola Burst, which is Shinra's power. As for Fire Force, it shifts from the introduction of the Burnish to the Mad Burnish to the terrorist group, to the Mad Burnish, the terrorist group that Leo is a part of, as well as eventually to Cray Foresight, who, major spoilers, turns out to be a Burnished himself, and by extension, the Foresight Foundation has a little role as being an antagonist entity, but it doesn't read as well since Cray has this dictatorial overview, and honestly, the Foresight Foundation also feels very pushed to the side, much the same way of Burning Rescue. I do want to bring up the reason I only mentioned Mad Burnish is because they, at the onset, are what's approached as the bad guys outside of the initial fire-wielding people, the destruction of half the population. But once Cray locks Gallo up, the entire team is really pushed to the side, much like Avalanche in the original Final Fantasy VII, once the true villain's revealed. I mean, they don't really feel... it's a much higher evil that they have to face against. Now, in comparison, we have 2 antagonistic organizations. One kind of a loose organization centered around a religious leader, and the other around a charismatic tyrant. Very similar, but we see that in all kinds of movies, or even video games. Hell, Street Fighter 2's M. Bison. Well, and the movie adaptation, charismatic leader. People flock around. It's just an organization setup. It's very basic. I mean, it's hard to say one ripped off the other. And while honestly both do have similar appearances with their white garb, the White Clad seems to have more in common with Akatsuki from Naruto. I mean, they're a mysterious organization trying to collect people with special powers to take down the world. I mean, it's not a hard stretch. And same with the Fire Force team. I mean, the Foresight Foundation capturing people with special powers to and that's the thing, they're not even trying to take over the world, they're trying to escape the world and accidentally destroy it if they follow through. And I mean, on top of that, on the other hand, Cray Foresight, he feels more in line with the tyrannical overlord like Lord Genome from Gurren Lagann, also another one of Studio Trigger's previous works. To top it off, the approach to both of these forces is different in the fact that what is shown in the anime is that the full story behind the White Clad and the Evangelists is still a bit of mystery to solve still, whereas, well, Promare, there's no mystery. We are spoon-fed that this is the bad guy and he's doing bad things with people who are introduced to... We're introduced people to hate. In turn, it makes the build-up to the Mad Burnished rather uneventful. And, not the build-up, the explosive entrance of the Mad Burnished. And, I mean, it's just like the firefighters in Gallo. I mean, it's used as a method to introduce Leo and serve as the other side of the coin to Gallo. So, I think the approaches to the antagonists between both series is different, because Fire Force uses it more as a mystery to build, whereas Promare, in its effort to make it just pure entertainment, just plows through everything and just it's got an agenda to get through in the next 2 hours. On top of the antagonists, we have side characters, which when it comes to side characters, I'll keep this part relatively light, as Fire Force has a richer cast due to its time to develop and focus a few episodes here and there on the different characters and completely different level of building them. But what makes something stand out to me is also the memorability of side characters. Fire Force, just in its first 4 episodes, introduces us a cast of memorable characters that stand out from the main trinity. And I used the first 4 episodes because it's roughly the runtime of Promere. Granted, there are some that are forgettable and you see them again, but they keep popping back up later on. But when it comes to Promare, we're introduced to half a dozen characters, and the introduction alone, who don't really do much more than fill out the shoes of an organization or repeat the same kind of stylized characters from Gurren Lagann and filling out their roles. I mean, they're roughly the same. I mean, they're basically nothing characters that we don't care about at all. And even the roughly 4 characters that do contribute slightly to a resemblance of the subplot are rather forgettable, since their plots don't really go anywhere. They just have a build up and then it's just all shut down. So I also bring this up because a lot of times what makes a movie successful or a TV show successful is the side characters. Even if they're there for a little bit, people will latch on to the ones they like. And for me, Promare just doesn't have that in the same way Fire Force does. Now, when it comes to the world, the reason I save the world for after the characters is because while the world may be interesting or disinteresting, it serves more as a background for everything else to take place in, and in many ways is its own character, which, interesting or not interesting, we're more focused on the actual story that it's supposed to be telling, and we don't want to be distracted by the 20 bazillion different things going on in the background. And Fire Force in itself has a rich and diverse world brought together from all corners of the world after the Great Cataclysm. This creates a weird but interesting fusion between like Eastern and Western architecture, which leads to a rather unique world. But this rich world allows us to see the outside world in its barren and dull environment. And when it comes to season 2, we get a little bit of that forest segment, so we get this little weird patch that's outside of the death area, basically. And to be fair, as I mentioned before, Fire Force does have a lot of time to build up a world, but there are many films that create a very rich world within its own time limits, like within 2 hours. And as for Promare, unfortunately, like I stated in my written review, the world is rather bleak in many regards. I mean, the frozen lake being the only part of the world I really cared for. Propolis? I probably butchered that. Which is the main city in it, which Gallo and everyone non-Burnished lives in. I mean, the rigid architecture is obviously a vehicle to promote conformity, as well as through its use of modernism of just repetitive squares and triangles. It's a very bleak modernist city, even though it's nice and clean. It feels just like an even more generic, futuristic dystopian society. And even the Fennel volcano settlement, which is a bit drab, it just continues the trope of it being livelier to show that the Burnished are people too. It's so cliched and just kind of, like just in comparison to the world of Fire Force. And I'm not saying that we need a drastic change in environment, but there's a way to approach it that doesn't make it feel like everything's divided. In Promare, everything feels like it's all completely separated and just so distant from each other as well. There's just it doesn't do a good job fully building the world. And even then, when it jumps from location to location, there's no context. When we go to the Fennel volcano, I have no clue where that's at in comparison to Promopolis, which obviously trope from Metropolis, but Promare, because why the hell not? We don't even know what the Promare really are, but we're going to call it Promopolis. And the Frozen Lake. All I know is it's wilderness, and it's starkly, drastically different from Promopolis. It just lacks the character to really develop the world, in my opinion. And so I think that's also a big difference in addressing the world, because if you're setting everything up and you're able to reference where stuff is roughly in location to each other, it makes for a much richer connected world instead of the divided world that Promare presents. And themes. I saved themes for the very end, quite honestly, because much of the story at its core can be boiled down to rather simple and basic plots that I think by this point I've already talked on quite a bit. And this is true for many shonen anime, though honestly, in my opinion, through the advancement of the world and the proliferation of anime, the lines between the very 90s and early 2000s definitions of shonen and shoujo, especially in the US, generally don't apply as much as they used to. But back to Fire Force and Promare. The plots can be boiled down to get togetherness to overcome evil through understanding and breaking down barriers, and just overcoming adversity are probably really the two main themes between Fire Force and Promare. Which commonality isn't, in my opinion, isn't a bad thing. It's how we categorize and group ideas and topics. And it's how we're able to understand and compare stories with similar elements and refine what we like and what we don't like. And while I have no doubt that Promare did heavily borrow from Fire Force, there's a bit more backstory to that, but that's neither here nor there. I think the biggest thing to take away is that while stories may have similar elements, what's mainly important is the execution. Fire Force uses its firefighting companies as a key aspect of the story, whereas Promare uses it as a starting point to pit Gallo and Leo against each other, which makes it feel much more like a back piece to the film as a whole compared to Fire Force. And both Promare and Fire Force will have... They both have different attitudes and different audiences. And what I think is telling is a story that makes connections and how it's arranged and rearranged, or it's how the arrangement and rearrangements of the same elements and tropes are spread through the genre are addressed. Honestly, I went into this rant thinking I was going to really tear apart Promare as being a blatant knockoff of Fire Force. But the more I started digging, the more I began to notice that while the basic elements are there, Promare is a drastically different story than that of Fire Force. At times is a reskinning of Naruto elements. It's easy to say, oh, this is just a knockoff of this, as we're trying to compare similarities. But I'm really glad I held off on doing this comparison, as I feel like I've had more time to reflect and analyze, because I did plan to do this as a written review back before Chris and I started building a little bit more, but it gave me time to really think, which led me to the realization that while Fire Force without a doubt has an original premise and a unique world, it has more in common than it does with Naruto than it does Promare. And I guess, in the end, despite my ramblings, it's important to take a step back and look at something a little bit more carefully than calling it a blatant ripoff or a knockoff. And honestly, I guess the other thing too is even give the potential knockoff a go. It might reach you better than the original property, or do something at least a little bit different or interesting. For me, this even goes back to Paranormal Activity or the mockbuster Paranormal Entity. For me, I do think one is better than the other, but I think Paranormal Entity did something a little bit differently and interesting that Paranormal Activity didn't, despite being basically the same film. And yeah, I don't know. I think just in general, it's easy to jump to a conclusion that because they're similar elements, they're a blatant ripoff or knockoff. And I guess the main point of this is just go out there and explore. Find stuff with similarities and find what works, what doesn't work. Hell, it'll help you grow as a media consumer to know more of what you do prefer, or it might open you up to a completely different world of cinema or just any type of entertainment media that you've never thought of before. So, but take that what you will. This has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird Spotlights, and I'm Nico, and thank you for listening to my ramblings. Peace.
Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.